Hello, welcome to the channel and thanks for watching. And he is finally done. Mortarion, the demon primarch of the Death Guard, is finally ready to join the rest of my Death Guard army. A fantastic model. I think every Death Guard army should be using Mortarion. He's amazing in game and it was a really enjoyable paint scheme. So stick around and I'll show you what I did. Now I started off, like a lot of my models, base coat with black and then spray a lead belcher over the top. In a lot of my paint schemes I'll either spray lead belcher or I'll spray Retributor armour, and you'll see that in a lot of my Death Guard videos based on how much of the Retributor armour colour is existing on the model. In this case there's not too many brass areas on Mortarion, so I went with the lead belcher. Has a lot of benefits to undercoating in a metallic versus undercoated into like a grey or a black, and we'll talk about that as we go through. First stage is taking that Retributor armour colour to do all the really cool brass areas on Mortarion. There are a fair few, but it's not, more than 50% of the model, and that's kind of how I decide what base colour I'm using. So just be real careful as you're going around, pick out the brass. You will notice through this video I do miss bits in the stages. He is a big model, never painted him before, so I do miss bits, but I'm using the wet palette, so if you miss stuff you can just go back and get that completed. So a lot of the brass around there is now done. Now moving on to the Death Guard green colour scheme. As we go through the video I might not necessarily mention the paints that I'm using, but I will drop them on the screen as you'll see to show you what colours I'm using and kind of where they're from. Now when I'm painting this Death Guard green I am not being super precise. I'm leaving some of the metallic undercoat showing through around any of the areas of battle damage or around some of the crevices near where the colours are, and that will show through as battle damage later in the paint scheme, and that's the beauty of undercoating metallic. Saves you that kind of stage of dry brushing, but also means you can do that kind of damage. Now I've done the purple there across all the robes, and now I'm going on to the kind of wing colour, and I'm using that kind of rotting flesh colour that I've used across all my Death Guard for their skin. This is a stage that you've got to be super precise and cover every last part because you don't want metallic showing through on the wings and the robes and things. Now moving on to the veins on the wings. Now this isn't something that's done in the official colour scheme, but it ties it in with my Death Guard colour scheme that I've done before. So just all the veins and all those panels, also on the little cherubs that float around him. Now bear in mind as you're painting you're always going to make mistakes, like you can see here. I've moved away from that vein, splodged it onto the wing, so now I'm just getting a bit of water onto the paintbrush and cleaning it off as I'm going. So as you are going through, if you make any mistakes like that, you can clean them up as you're going, or you can cover them back up later if you don't notice and it dries off. Now Mortarion's robes are kind of this weird split colour. So I've done the top robes in that purple, and I'm doing a nice dark brown colour for what you see as the bottom robes. Now I'm not painting every last inch of these bottom robes, you'll notice. I'm kind of stopping with a small section of the bottom of each of the robes where it kind of turns into this weird sorceress kind of thing where it's floating him off the ground in combination with his wings, and we'll go back to that later. But I'm painting the top part and then I'm just leaving the bottom showing metallic, as you can see there. Now the rock that he's on, I'm doing a base coat here of a grey colour, which is the same grey I'm going to be using on all the smoke and things coming out of the sensors and coming out of the equipment on his back. The grey on the rock, I do go back and do some extra work later which is not shown on camera, put some extra dry brushing of some browns and greens on the rock to make it look a bit more livable, but on the smoke it's just a pure grey. Now moving on to this kind of purple colour coming out of his wings, it complements the kind of more red fleshy colour that's going to be done on his wings. It's also a colour I've used on some of the Terminators when you see that insectoid Terminator and Marine. So I'm trying to pull the colours that I've used across the army into Mortarion so that he will blend really well in the army, and you will see the colours on him replicated across the army. So I think that's just a nice way of doing a centrepiece rather than me doing the Games Workshop colours. You saw there me doing the bones onto his shoulders, nice and quick and easy. When you're painting bone, just the tip, try and paint from the base to the top and keep your brush strokes in the flow of how that bone grows, because your brush strokes kind of will show out. Now we're just doing some black onto all the flies and things that are coming into that smoke. I also put a lot of black onto all the cables coming out of his sort of chest and around the body there. And again, that's a colour I've used on the Death Guard themselves, and the casings of his pistol I've done in there. Now doing the handle of his scythe, just in the brown, and interestingly I've built it with the scythe in his left hand and the pistol on the right. All the photos seem to show it the other way around, but you do get alternate build instructions in the kit, and I just thought it was a bit interesting to do it, the opposite way around and have him sort of pointing his gun and shooting. Just some interest. I've done no other conversions on this model, which is quite unusual for me, but it's such a good model that I thought, right, leave it as is and we'll just do it that way. Now we're doing the pustules and things here. A lot of my other models, especially vehicles, I've modelled in pustules and made it all there, but Mortarion's got enough on him And I'm just picking that out with a nice bright yellow colour. I'm also dropping this yellow into some of the gaps and cracks of the armour, and then we'll do some pustules later. Now here we are finishing the cloak. Done in super speed, but what I'm doing is I'm taking quite a bright green that's more of a highlight colour for Death Guard green, dropping that onto the end of the cloak. Then I'm dropping some of the brown we've already done on the cloak and literally wet blending physically on the model with the very kind of vibrant green and the dark brown. And this is just a little bit of artistry, a little bit of playing and messing around. I've done wet blending on the channel quite a few times. I will do a separate video at some point because a few people keep asking, can you just do how to wet blend? But it's as fairly simple as this. Take your bright colour, put it on the end of the robe like we're doing here, and then take the darker colour and put it where the brown is already there. Mix the two together, sort of somewhere in between, and spread it across both parts. Hopefully that kind of makes sense, but we're just very, very quickly doing it, as you can see here, and then taking some of that final bright colour, so you can see hopefully on there where the colour is, putting on 3 or 4 different colour stages there, depending how much it's blended, and then I'm just dropping on some of the vibrant green just on the edges to show those colorations there. So it's not championship class wet blending this is just a quick way of doing it to show that colour gradients, but I think it works really well, and we'll go back to it later in the highlight stage after we've done the washes. Now I'm taking just a metal colour and going through and doing all these staple things where his robes are stitched together. This is how the model meshes together when it's built. Quite a nice way of doing that, to be honest. And you can see there again, put the metal in the wrong place and just take a wet brush and then a little bit of the brown just to cover over my mistake there. So fix your mistakes as you go, makes it a lot easier than trying to remember what you did later on. Now it is the ink wash stage, so I'm going to super speed here. This is a Vallejo ink wash, brilliant wash. Use this on all of my Death Guard models, gives a real nice dirty effect, and this is that mid layer to blend these tones together. Now you can see here, nice thin layer of the wash. You'll see if I put too much on in places, I will move it around the model, use some paper to take it off the brush in there, because you don't want too much because it'll clump up. I would recommend experimenting with this on a smaller model before you start going straight into Mortarion, but it's a great way of kind of doing those midtones, getting some contrast into the cracks and crevices of the model. And for me, if you were to just carry on without doing a wash stage, the colours become a little bit flat, and it's one of my favourite things, the Vallejo wash, but there's tons of washes out there. Any sepia wash will do a dirty, mucky wash, and here is what it looks like in between. Now, some of the areas in the model you could just leave with it, just the wash, and it'll be absolutely fine. The majority of the brass I don't go back and do anything to, but the armour, some of the wings, particularly the bright areas, I think you just need to go back a little bit. Now I've already done the shoulder armour, as you see there, with the Death Guard green, going in a little bit closer so you can see what I'm talking about. Now as I'm painting it on here, I am using it off the wet palette. This paint is quite thin down now, and what we're looking at doing is putting it onto the raised areas. We're not going into the damaged areas, you can see there, and into the crevices where that wash has really settled. We want to be able to almost see through this layer of paint, because you want some of that kind of murkiness to show through this stage. So don't just go put in clear paint on. If you're not using the wet palette, water it down a bit, and you can see I do go over sections, sometimes 2 or 3 times, to get that kind of translucency through, and it gives you all those different gradients of paint and colour just showing through those layers. So be very careful, go through it in stages, and what we want is that almost effect where it looks like we've got 4, 5, 6 different colours of green on these armour panels, and it gives a real nice murky, mucky, slightly grim dark effect as we're going. So take your time on this one, don't put too much paint on. If you do, because it should be fairly watered down, you can just move it around with your paintbrush, put it into the areas that you're comfortable with as you're doing it. Now in this stage I'm not going to show myself doing every single paint we've just shown you. I'm just going to go through and show some key areas. So same thing again, going on to the purple here, we're only going on the raised areas, so we're sort of edge highlighting, but we're going into a little bit more of an area. So you can see I've not touched that area where the folds of the cloth are. I've left the wash deeply into there, so it almost looks browny black into the real deep folds. Then it comes out slightly where the wash hasn't settled so much into a sort of darker purple. Then I'm lightening it up with this stage, so it looks like, again, 2, 3 or 4 colours of purple as we go. Now onto the wings. Slightly different technique I'm using here. I'm sort of dry brushing. It is still a watered down paint, so it is quite watered down. I'm making sure there's not too much of it on my brush, and I'm almost dry brushing over every area of the wing. Again, I want a nice thin layer of this paint building up, and I want to see those kind of brown, murky, streaky areas showing through this layer. So I really am building it up very, very slowly, very, very gradually, and it is kind of like a dry brush stage. but with the paint being slightly watered down, whereas traditionally you might take more of a dry paint to do this. I am using the watered down paint, taking most of it off the brush and building it up very, very slowly. What I'm also doing is I'm not being too bothered if I catch the veins and things across the model, and I'm just going over the pustules as well, because it'll add a nice little extra texture layer onto the veins, and we'll do some work later. What I've also done with this same dry brush colour, which again is the same colour we did the skin earlier, is I'm going over the black kind of piping and stuff across there, and it gives a real nice highlight effect. So I've not used any more black onto this model at this stage. I do drop some black back onto the flies and things, because we again do this technique and go over the smoke and everything, but I don't do any black on the cables. Now I'm just touching up in some areas, because although I like the dry brush of this flesh colour over the wings, it's got a little bit too bright in patches, so just taking some of that purple colour that we used originally and just touching up where we're not 100% happy on those veins and things. Now I mentioned before, if you put too much paint on, just move it around the model, and I put too much paint on here, I clear the brush off, and then I just put the brush back to that area and move around the paint that I've put on that I thought was a bit too thick. So it shows you how much you can actually spread paint around an area, because I'm now moving on to the next side of this kind of bone piece. So, you know, if you make a mistake as you go in, fix it as you go, kind of get used to those techniques for when you make a mistake, how you correct it. So as I said, it's a really enjoyable model to paint as this Mortarion, and it kind of might be the culmination of my Death Guard army. I've not quite decided whether I want to continue doing this army and add things to it, because it's quite a large force, or whether this might be it. So, you know, this may be the last Death Guard you see in the channel, it may not be, but it's a fantastic model to kind of potentially finish the army off with. Now going on to the robes and cloaks, same principle. We're doing the same little wet blending there, so just putting the brown on, dropping the green onto the very end, and then just meshing those two colours together to give that effect we talked about before. So on this model here, it's a culmination of all the little techniques and things I've done for my Death Guard all through it, trying to, again, like I said before, use all the same colours so that he really does look like the leader of the army. What I didn't want to do is go, you know, and do a totally different painting style on Mortarion that's going to make him look radically different from the rest of the force. And interestingly, if you have watched a lot of the channel before, or you follow me on Instagram, you will have seen me using a Mortarion to take down a Warlord Titan in a big game of 40k over the summer. Now, that wasn't my Mortarion. At the time, I had a big knight army for Nurgle, and I took a big force of knights and a Death Guard to get to about 10,000 points, and I really wanted to use Mortarion, and a friend had him, so it's finally time to get my one on the table rather than just borrowing someone else's. Now here's the final stage on the wings. I'm using a contrast paint and a wash here. These are the first paints we've used that weren't in the first stage. And I'm taking the purple stage of the wash, the contrast paint, and I'm putting that onto the tears in his wings, but also the veins and some of the areas where there's like almost creases running down to the edge of the wings. So I'm probably covering maybe a quarter of those areas. And I am doing the whole wing in one go, because the room I'm painting in isn't super hot, so this contrast paint won't dry by the time I've done the whole wing. If you're in a hot room or a hot country, you might want to sectionalise it and do a little part of the wing before you move on to the next stage. Because what we're going to do now is use the green colour after this and almost blend these two colours together to give extra layer of colour and murk. So what I do is I drop a couple of the green areas onto the couple of panels I'm going to work on. The wash dries very quick, so I don't do the whole wing at once. And then I'm spreading it around, and you can see there some of the area where the kind of purple has gone quite thick. As I go back over it, you'll notice it kind of smears and blends in with the green. Particular piece just here you can notice, and it gives a nice purpley, greeny, manky sheen across the wings. So we've gone across both sides of both wings on there, and now we're onto real final detail stages, taking a little bit of Nylak oxide, which makes a nice rusty brass effect, putting that onto some rivets, some areas across him, and these are again another last couple of paints that we didn't do in the first stage, and these just finish them off. I didn't do this on every single Death Guard model, I only did it on a few, but Mortarion deserves a couple little bit of extra details. And now it's the nice final technical stage of the Nurgle's Rot, getting it across all the areas we painted yellow. So you can see here where those kind of murky, manky patches are modelled into the model. I painted those yellow, and now we'll put in the Nurgle's Rot over the top, and it gives a nice kind of effect. And you'll see I've already done this on the base just before it was let to dry over an evening. So it kind of ties again that model together. And here he is, the completed painted Mortarion again. I'm really pleased with him. This is pre me varnishing him. I always use a matte varnish on a model, so he's matte varnished, and then I go back over and do the Nurgle's Rot again, because varnish over the Nurgle's Rot dulls it down. So there is a couple of extra stages on here I'm not going to show, but it is just repeating that same piece. So I hope you liked that. If you did, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz, and check me out and check all the videos. Cheers, guys.